For a very long time, the goalpost we had with Ryze was make him easier to play so he can have a higher win rate and not be picked all the time in pro. And we succeeded. He is no longer picked all the time in pro, and he has the highest win rate he's basically ever had for a decade. He's strong, he's viable, and he's not a pro problem. That said, he is also by far the least popular he has ever been. SYLAS is being nerfed. Why is this a thought? The context on the SYLAS changes is we are trying to move him more towards bruisery builds. Now, I don't have the exact details on the change list. It's very possible that it ends up being a nerf, and I don't think the intent is to super nerf him. But I think the idea behind the SYLAS changes is he's pretty bursty and pretty assassin-y, and trying to open up space for more bruiser builds on him. Whether or not those exact changes achieve that is another question, and I don't think they're intended to be hard nerfs to him, so that's another question. But yeah, kind of a note of the goal, whether or not the changes get there, is can we open up SYLAS to build a bit more bruisery items and make him feel good about those. Do you have a favorite archetype of champion to design? Can you all guess? Someone asked, what's my favorite archetype of champion design? If you know what designs I've made, you probably can guess what I like making. Can anybody guess? What's my favorite champion archetype to work on? Let's see. Someone said I like melee champs, kill resets, college homework, kill resets, healing, 3-hit passives, 80 carries, autos. Yeah, it's 80 carries. My favorite archetype to work on as a champion designer is 80 carries. 80 carries are a blast. I feel like there's so much stuff you can do with them. And the cool part about 80 carries is that they all just die. And because they all just die, you get to do such bullshit, crazy things on them and make it fair. Now, sometimes you go too far. Let's not talk about Zeri. But generally speaking, I look at a character like, say, Jhin, and it's like, man, I get to make Jhin root you from off your screen and shoot you with his ult from 3,000 years away. And it's like, that's fine because he's squishy and he doesn't jump over walls, right? So I think one thing that's fun about 80 carries is that they have this core class weakness of being killable, which really opens them up to do some silly fun stuff that's not going to be nearly as frustrating as a character like a melee carry, right? There's this meme here, Riot, August, Diego. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but someone made this meme of me, and I think the funny thing about this meme is the difference to me between Jhin and Viego is that Jin's a ranged character. He's an 80 carry, so I get to do silly stuff on 80 carries, where if I do similar silly stuff on a melee character, it's way more frustrating. And so one of the reasons Viego came out and he was so crazy was really, it was just well, you have to do crazy things to make squishy melee champions work. If Jhin had swords and ran around and tried to slice you up every 4 hits, I guarantee you he'd be doing some crazy stuff. He'd probably go untargetable. He'd probably dodge skill shots. He'd probably be able to cut bullets out of the air. It turns out that melee skirmishers, especially the squishy ones, they need a lot to really, they need a lot to really function. Thoughts on Ryze? Think his ult is underwhelming. He's not super good. I think Ryze, personally, needs to be reworked to be hard to play again. For a very long time, the goalpost we had with Ryze was make him easier to play so he can have a higher win rate and not be picked all the time in pro. And we succeeded. He is no longer picked all the time in pro, and he has the highest win rate he's basically ever had for a decade. He's strong, he's viable, and he's not a pro problem. That said, he is also by far the least popular he has ever been. So to me, what that indicates is, despite the fact that, back in the day, it was sad when Ryze would have to be continuously nerfed for pro, a version of Ryze that is harder to play, lower win rate, and more pro present is probably more what Ryze players want than a version of Ryze that's easier to play, higher win rate, and less present in pro. So my personal take on Ryze is we probably need to do some work to make him more complex again, is what I would say. The second thing I have on Ryze, and this is personal opinion, doesn't mean we're going to do it, doesn't mean we should do it, is I think scaling damage with mana on that character is troll. And the reason I think it's troll is whenever he actually builds mana items to do damage that aren't like Rod of Ages, that aren't like, what's it called? Seraphs. So we're talking things like Frozen Heart, stuff like that. Whenever he's building weird mana items to do damage, it tends to create balance problems with him, and then we like make it so he can't do it. And so in a world where we don't actually let him use the mana items to do damage, the weird ones like Frozen Heart and stuff like that, I think we're just supposed to say, like, why are we letting him scale with mana in that way? And so I think Ryze would be happier and healthier if he just had standard damage scaling and we, indexed in other things for the character, like, being more complex, choosing what spells he's doing, maybe make the ultimate a better spell to use in combat in some way, stuff like that. Why can't you nerf different champions like this? If a champion goes to a certain lane, it gets X% of the intended damage. Well, so that's actually, like, in isolation, that makes sense, but it's hard in practice. So as an example, League of Legends is a dynamic game. The question was, why can't you just say if a champion goes top lane, they do 10% less damage? The problem with that is League of Legends is a dynamic game. What does it mean to go top lane? Does it mean you went there at level 1? What if you go to top lane at level 1, you get the 10% damage nerf, and then at level 2 you swap with your mid laner? Should we remove the nerf? Should we have it forever? How is a player going to know that? How is a player going to know that if they go top lane, they got nerfed, right? Like, stuff like that. Those types of levers are fairly easy for the jungle because we can quite literally say your character does less damage to monsters, right? And they're fairly easy for like a support versus a solo lane. We can say your character's bad at wave clear. But making an explicit differentiation between you went top, you went bot, you went mid is actually pretty sketchy in terms of game balance because League of Legends is a dynamic game and you should be able to swap lanes, right? Like you should be able to be like, okay, well, we need to swap top and mid because like it's going hard. Like that happens in some games, right? You might be like, okay, well, if you swap, swap the damage. And it's like, so you're saying that like it's region based and like I just randomly do 10% less damage if I'm in specifically the top lane? What if I need to split push bot lane, right? Like mainly it's like the solution at face value seems easy. It's like if you go mid, do 10% less damage. But once that you like think about the actual long form implementation of it, it gets really sketchy. Where it's like, okay, so I do 10% less damage based on the lane I go to at the start of the game. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to load up into the game. I'm going to convince my bot laner to swap with me at level 1 so I don't get the damage nerf. And then at level 2, I swap back, right? Like, there's just, there's a lot of, like, really weird outcomes of a balanced strategy like that that are very unnatural and probably just wouldn't work out too well.